I would like to start this video off by saying there is a lot of gore in this series, and I mean a lot. I will put some in this video if YouTube allows it, but if you plan to watch the series, just be wary of all the violence and blood. I will also be spoiling the series in this video, so go watch it on Netflix if you want to jump in fresh. Or you can always pirate it. Whoa, am I late to this one? Because this series was truly hyped up, screamed about, and exploding online when it came out. It semi-caught my attention, and I always meant to watch it, but I never planned to make a review on it. For that, I'd like to thank Fahim on Patreon for commissioning me to talk about this. While I enjoy watching anything, I certainly enjoy watching things that are good, and Edgerunners was a pretty fantastic experience. Now, Cyberpunk, the game, I knew nothing about. The only thing I really knew was that one Keanu Reeves edit.
Dick.
I didn't even know the anime was based off the game, or based around the game. Inspired from the game? I don't know, but apparently the protagonist's apartment can be found in the game itself, so that's pretty cool. Also apparently, the player base for Cyberpunk went way up when this anime came out. Source, my roommate, but I believe him because I don't know why he'd lie to me. I'm sure there are plenty of videos out regarding this series, especially since it caused such a ruckus online. It was a pretty genius move to make an anime out of the game, since video game fans and anime fans go pretty hand in hand in my opinion. By all means, they probably didn't have to make this series good for it to be successful, but thankfully they did. I always love when art prevails. We did it, lads! Cyberpunk Edgerunners was released in September of 2022. It's over a year old now, but still pretty recent, and this series is made by my nemesis company,
Netflix.
Netflix have currently only made two things I deem masterpieces, BoJack Horseman and Devilman Crybaby. But BoJack Horseman was one of their first originals ever, so they were kind of allowed to just freeball with it, while Devilman Crybaby was only licensed by Netflix, meaning they just sent all the money off to a Japanese studio and allowed them to do whatever they wanted with it. Generally speaking, non-American produced Netflix shows tend to be pretty good, or at least they're the ones I find are the best to watch from this company. And Cyberpunk Edgerunners was certainly no exception to this. It's good to see Netflix animation getting some recognition. I sure hope this continues. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll stop. Now please take note, I am not a sci-fi buff. I have no doubt sci-fi fans could talk about this series much more in depth than I can, as their familiarity with the genre would leave them a lot more big brain than me. However, I do dabble in sci-fi, and some of my favorite movies are sci-fi. While I'm much more attracted to sci-fi horror, movies such as the classic Blade Runner and the just as classic Akira certainly changed my brain chemistry. I would definitely throw those under the category of existential dread sci-fi. Cyberpunk Edgerunners somewhat fits this trope, and it definitely dives into a world of late-stage capitalism bleakness naturally combined with the struggling person. And just like all classic sci-fi, and just like the genre tends to always promise, there's also a heavy exploration on the theme of humanity. Humanity in how we live it, how we suffer through it, and how we lose it, in more ways than just cybernetic upgrades. This main humanity theme is what I'm excited to explore, and what made the watch super engaging to me personally. But before I do that, it's sponsor time! While we cannot all be pirates in our current day and age, we can still be pirates online, and we can do that safely with Atlas VPN. If you're not a tech nerd like me and have no idea what a VPN is, a VPN makes it so all your internet searches, browsing, and history is completely protected. It's sure to hide your IP address and keeps you safe from spying, especially from the pesky FBI agent in your computer who's watching you look up Zoro's big fat boobies as we speak. But Atlas VPN isn't just a VPN, it also protects you from pop-up ads and malicious malware. It can also give you access to any country's version of Netflix or multiple other streaming services. I mentioned Netflix specifically because did you guys know multiple One Piece movies are on Australian Netflix? And with Atlas, you, yes, you, can take advantage of Atlas's Black Friday sale. You can get get a 3-year subscription from $1.70 a month, with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Even better than that, if you use my link in the description below, you get an 86% discount for premium subscription. Snatch that deal while it's hot, and thank you so much Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video. I won't let you down. Okay, now let's get into the dark, depressing world of Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Before I really get into anything, I should start off by saying I watched the Japanese dub version, because I prefer watching anything in its original language since I think it's the most accurate depiction you're going to get of the original director's vision. I swear I do this for any non-English property and not just for anime, please don't bully me for it. Ugh. The only thing is, holy shit, Netflix's subtitles suck. I was wondering what the hell was going on because while I'm not a Japanese speaker, I can at least pick out bits and pieces of what they're actually saying. For example, this is definitely not saying this. I eventually figured it out when I realized they were subtitling directly from the English version, which throws vastly different words in different areas. Ergo, the Japanese version doesn't get its own English subtitle translation, which honestly sucks ass, because anyone can hear there's a vast difference in how all these characters are speaking compared to their English versions. The protagonist certainly isn't that soft, but he's not yelling, "I gotta chip the fuck up" like this. Thanks Netflix, that's so cool. I'm really glad you care so much. I miss the era of fan subs so much, man. Just be wary of that if you're wanting to watch this in its original language, because I can guarantee these characters will all be saying completely different things to whatever the English is translating it to sometimes. Maybe that doesn't annoy you so much, but it drove my head in whenever it was extremely noticeable. At the same time, I know you poor subtitle workers at Netflix get paid shit all, so thank you for doing your best. I love you. Mwah. Anyways, let's actually get into the story. In my opinion, the first episode was one of the best episodes of the entire series. It had a fantastic setup, a fantastic world building, and succeeded in showing us just how grim this pretty horrible world is. It also set the pace pretty well, considering this entire series just shoots by. The speed in which everything happens is insane, but I can't say it's too much of an issue because at no point does it ever slow down. You're not stop starting like a poor soul stuck in traffic. From the very beginning, you hit that gas and you're off until you crash into a wall screaming by the time the final episode's credits roll up. Just like all great sci-fi series, we establish the system is the problem as a cop gets his brains blown out. Awesome! Because it's not sci-fi, and especially not cyberpunk if it's not about the people against the capitalist corporation organization that powers this world. And Edgerunners makes a point of showing us just how horrifying the people of this world seem to look. After all, the man we open on is hardly a man anymore, looking much more like machine. A startling contrast when we quickly cut to our protagonist David, who is the sweetest, most human looking boy in comparison to the monster we just saw. And from here, we get a look into the life of my boy, David Martinez. Not only do we get a look into the technology of this world by watching David's gaming system, we get a look into the bleakness of his home city. Night City, just from the daily life within his apartment. This comes with small things like him being unable to pay for his own washing machine cycle in his own house, seeming expensive to run it as he doesn't have the money to be able to top it up. Meanwhile, his mother is asleep on the couch from a long night's work, her job struggling to even pay the washing machine. This is made even more depressing by the fact she's revealed to be a paramedic, a clearly high maintenance job that has her exhausted and seems to be giving her barely anything. Cool! This sure doesn't reflect the real world or anything, ahaha! Oh god. The world continues to build when David makes his way to school, the usual path he seems to take every day. One that has him literally jumping into trash every day, because that sure isn't a metaphor for the way he sees himself or his mental state at all, especially when being told how fancy-pantsy his school is. It's very clear just how grim this entire place is, and how awful this entire city seems to be. At least for the common person, there's no safe haven in this place. From David being completely numb at the gunpoint robbery taking place on the street beside him, to not even blinking at the freaks jacking off in broad daylight with no consequence nor care. It's quite obvious that this place just sucks. If there's a god in this world, he's certainly not here. And yet David has still managed to keep pieces of his innocence despite everything, something made a lot more apparent in upcoming episodes. But from the first episode, David is just a poor kid who can't even afford the technology needed at his fancy school. A school his mother busted her ass for so he could be accepted into. He can't pick or win a fight against the rich snobs in his school, and he can't even get in trouble without his sweet mother picking him up to reprimand him. David's pretty normal life at this point aside, there's a pretty outright shown commentary of classism here. David has no friends in this school. The rich kids looking down on David completely for not belonging there. And this theme is made both prominent and harrowing with a scene including David's mother. As the two of them are driving home from the school, their car banged up and used, they get caught in a violent highway crossfire. When the car flips, David's mother flies out, and a service called the trauma team finds her lying on the road while David watches from inside the car. At first, David is relieved at seeing them upon believing they'll help his mother, but then they say the lines, "She's not a client, leave her." And David shouts in horror when his own mother is left for dead. What we have just witnessed is the prejudice this world holds. We are seeing a city where money dominates all, and if you can't supply it, your life is not worth saving, even if the equipment and medicines exist to keep everyone healthy and alive. David manages to get his poor mother to an extremely dingy hospital where his lack of funds has him limited in just how his mother is treated, and he leaves that night with her in stable condition. Unfortunately, upon coming back the next day, she passed. As David doesn't react, as he's not given any remorse, and as he's handed an iPad to have to immediately pick a funeral plan, he says something that kind of shattered me. I got a choice. Just after he's told his mother's dead, and just after he's been told he needs to deal with her dead body, he's surprised at the fact he has options on how to deal with it. Made even more jarring and even more depressing when her body comes out cremated in a damn vending machine. It is severely fucked up. In these moments, David doesn't even cry. He's hardly responsive at all. This drastic life change and grief leaving him void. He tries to get on with his life, tries to sell this high-tech gear his mum had for a quick buck to continue living, and as he's doing all this, the metal urn that contains her body stays in the foreground. Once he finally sits down and listens to a call from his classmate, who pretty much mocks his mother's death and calls her an insignificant person who tried to live past her means, his anxious twitch comes through. A habit of tapping his foot and cradling his head, something we saw when talking to his mother previously, trying to contain his emotions and anger. Throughout this phone call, David's anger builds drastically, a pure look of rage in his eyes with everything being said to him, and he snaps when deciding to implant the high-tech device his mother had previously found into his own body. The first episode made it clear that this whole series would be a rapid nosedive of David's own life, a swift and tragic descent into a grieving madness, foreshadowed by the term cyberpsychosis, which we can piece together is a terrible mental disease in this world. Because from this point on, we watch David's grief consume him. Without anyone to live for anymore, or anyone to really make proud, he uses his new tech to beat the shit out of the rich students who previously mocked him. He states he's not afraid to get caught anymore, that he's not afraid of the consequences, and takes his leave when getting kicked out of of the school. With no real purpose, he aimlessly gets on a train, and this is where he meets a character who leads him down a path of both freedom and aggression, Lucy. It can be very heavily argued where the turn in David's life really started. Can be debated where the pin dropped and when he truly lost control, as his mother's death was certainly a factor, but I would heavily argue Lucy's introduction of his life is what truly set the ball rolling. Not because he wouldn't have gone down this path anyways, and not because she's some cyber witch who brought him to a new world, which I don't think she is, I think she's awesome, but because she gave him a purpose without her truly knowing. At this point, David is just a boy with an advanced military-grade cyberware installed in him, a teen full of grief and anger, and he had nowhere to direct it. David wasn't exactly looking for a change in this world, he just wanted to do something to avenge his mother and live largely like she wanted him to. He was looking for a way to live his life and ride out this sorrow he'd been ruined by. Lucy supplied that, not just with the tasks she gave him, but with the wildness in which she lived her life. And the scene of them gliding down the highway while David stared up at her in awe was fantastic in showing that. I won't summarize each thing that happens episode by episode because this video is not a recap, but the plot of this series is pretty standard in terms of sci-fi. It's nothing really original in how it functions, in terms of taking on the big corporation and the mega capitalist world, but it finds originality in its characters, particularly in the portrayal of David's downward spiral. There's plenty of reluctant hero stories, where the mother specifically for some reason dies, and leaves our hero to either run or fight. But David's story is molded by the people around him. His path didn't particularly feel his own, and we see this defined through his meeting of the Edgerunners. From what I know, the Edgerunners didn't have a noble goal, or really any kind of goal. They simply operated under Maine, objectively the coolest character in the show due to how he literally blew a guy to bits. Party popped his ass, oh my god. But it seems the plan was to do quick, dangerous jobs for money. In reality, they were more bottom feeders of the city than anything else. But Maine held them together with a pride and care David very heavily admired. Each character here is distinctive in both personality and design, with Rebecca being my absolute favorite. Lucy was on track to being my favorite, but she mellowed out pretty fast. Makes sense why she did, I just can't say I enjoyed that aspect too much. All I know is Lucy skidding down a highway on a stretcher while laughing like a maniac is vastly different from the end result Lucy. But this is what boys will do to you, I guess. But in saying that, it kind of feels to be the point. Because even though she puts her trust in David and starts a relationship with him, was this good for either of them? The relationship throughout the series didn't seem good. It didn't seem balanced, nor did it really feel healthy. And while I don't doubt they loved each other, the rose-tinted beginning of it all certainly seemed to fade. Especially with David's ongoing growing distance from not just her, but from himself. Because what this series does in a fantastic way, and the way it yanks at our hearts, is set up and show the path to madness we know David will inevitably fall into. An episode that was especially a masterpiece with its tragedy, and one that blew me away, was episode 6, Girl on Fire. I'm sure this is not a controversial opinion. I'm sure this episode has been praised to high hell, but that'd be for very good reason. This episode, through Maine, finally shows us the harrowing side effects of cyberpsychosis. It shows us what happens when one balances on the edge of humanity, and it shows us the terrifying consequences of one's soul and sanity slipping away from falling off off that edge. We knew the physical damage of the upgrades in this world. We watched David suffer the consequences of his own tech, through nosebleeds and fainting. But we hadn't seen the truly devastating part of it all, and that's the loss of self. In this cyberpsychosis state, as the effects get severe, the victim will be thrown back into their past. This is pretty heavily implied as Maine suffers delusions of a foreign landscape, one we haven't seen but Maine knows very well. And through these delusions, we see a younger man who is an unmodified, non-upgraded version of Maine. In a terribly cruel twist, it seems cyberpsychosis is a disease that throws one into a time when they were their most human. Whatever Maine's seeing and whatever's happening to him can be interpreted in hundreds of ways, but it feels very prominent that this state has the focus of humanity. Perhaps the human body can survive multiple upgrades. Perhaps physically everyone can upgrade whatever tech they want on themselves, but the human mind cannot. It feels as if Maine's soul is screeching out at him, desperately trying to bring back his human self from a time when he was the most human. And the disconnect of body and mind is what drives one truly crazy, to the point Maine can't recognize where he is. He can't recognize anyone around him, and most tragically, he can't recognize himself. More than anything, this disease is an existential dread brought upon by the molding of metal and flesh, which is extremely horrific to watch Maine suffer through. And after David witnesses this, after he's holding Maine's literal hands taken off his dead corpse, a single tear slides down his mortified face. Because not only has he witnessed the effects of such a disease, he watched the man he admired crumble to ash through the insanity of his own slipping humanity. Something he knows is a very possible future for himself, and something we watch happen to him from this point on. The thing about David is, even in this wretched world, he still had a softness most people didn't have. He still had a kindness and an innocence for the world and people one way or another. I feel this is well symbolized through his inability to drink anything carbonated. David being sensitive to the bubbles and bursting into a coughing fit just from it touching his lips. But then, as we jump ahead, as we meet a newly built David, filled with new installments and new tech, his incapability to handle the bubbles seems to be gone. And from him watching new recruits die without even as much as a sigh, to no longer needing to sleep, to simply staring at his mother's urn for hours on end, we can deduce it's because his humanity is slipping from him. He'd not only been numbed to the violence around him by everything he's seen, but by what he's become. And this is now a cybernetic machine of a person gazing emptily at the ashes of his dead mother. I assume this is because, at this point, David was coming to the horrifying realization that he's beginning to feel nothing. He's not feeling anger at death, he's not feeling the tiredness to sleep, and he no longer feels grief when staring at his mother's urn. There could be a commentary on money here, regarding the unfeelingness that comes with wealthiness, as he went from being unable to pay for his washing to calling a 250k trip to the moon cheap in this very quick span of time. And of course, that falls into the topic of humanity. But it seems the one emotion David can still feel, which is shown prominently through an assassination job, is the emotion of fear. David, more than anything, is scared. He's scared of losing his loved ones, losing control, and losing himself. His cyberpsychosis is beginning to hit rapidly, already experiencing delusions in this new body he's found himself in. Becoming so severe, he shoots an innocent worker who's exactly like his own mother. And in that same night, he stares directly at his mother's urn, a terrifying emptiness in his eyes before blacking out from a seizure. Just like Maine, David has gotten to the edge, and now he's beginning to tip further and further over. It's disturbing to witness, considering we have all the warning signs. We've seen the outcome, and now we must experience David's declining humanity with him. And there's plenty of observations in his decline concerning how long until one is more machine than human, or extremism of what one will do for their loved ones. But as previously mentioned, the main interest is on David's innocence, particularly on just how fast he lost it. Because when the worst is gone through and David has sacrificed himself for Lucy's well-being, we are left with one final shot. Lucy on the moon, staring at the Earth she so desperately wanted to get away from. She's alone beneath these stars, on this clump of rock that seems to have lost its dazzling appeal, and she sees a vision of David. But this David isn't the cybernetic monster we'd come to know, or the one who had died for Lucy. This is the David she met and showed her dreams to. A David who's innocent. A David who's completely human. And we realize in this moment just how fast he spiraled. Just how quickly he'd lost his boyish smile and joyous laughter, dying tragically as a war-crazy machine. Is it Lucy's fault due to him meeting her on that single day? No. I don't believe that's what this is about. David lived in a world that was so void of hope, so draining of life that it caused even someone as sweet as him to lose himself. Night City's system was one of grinding gears, of soul-sucking hopelessness, that it chewed and spat David out. Where would David be if this system was forgiving even just the smallest bit? If his mother was saved by the trauma team? If his school paid for the technology needed for his education? If he didn't have to fish his mother out of a fucking vending machine? Where would he be if he was shown just a little bit of kindness, just a little bit of empathy, just the smallest goddamn bit of humanity? Where would he be if this system were more heart than machine? In a world so twisted that treats its people like corporate slaves, who can only exist if they live by the means of which they're forced into, how could David possibly keep his glowing soul? Just as this city had torn him apart emotionally, he tore himself apart physically, becoming as unfeeling and cold as the world he'd been born into. And it's depressing, not just for the fact David lost himself, but because this world was so cruel, he couldn't even find his own dream of which to live by. He still had his mother's hopes stuck in his head, laughing in a crazed daze when making it to the Arasaka Corporation's roof. He used Maine's literal hands to continue keeping the Edgerunners safe best he could, continuing on Maine's ambition of everyone getting a fair cut. He told Lucy his own dream had been to get her to the moon, whether he made it there or not. But this is still a goal that didn't focus on David's own life, especially with Lucy wishing for him to come with her. We watched this boy be aimless in his life and never live for himself due to what this city had ripped from him. It ripped his mother's life away, both mentally and physically. It ripped his mentor's sanity from him. It ripped his lover's childhood from her, before eventually it ripped David's own humanity from him, taking his life in the process. As Lucy had said, Night City is a prison where people are only treated as human if they can pay for it. It's a vile thought, but so brilliantly done. And that final shot makes David's descent so soul-shattering. There is honestly a lot more I could talk about in terms of technicality, regarding shot composition and style. The music was so perfectly handled, succeeding in either making me tear up or sliding me to the edge of my seat. But I unfortunately can't play any because I'll get copyrighted. There are some absolutely stunning shots though, done with both incredible directing and fantastic coloring. Leave it to Studio Trigger to make everything just pop in a beautiful way. There couldn't be a better studio to bring this cyberpunk world to life. Not everything is perfect, of course. My biggest peeve was probably the predictability of character death. Maine's was less of a foreshadow and more of a slap in the face, telling David he'll give him his hands if he dies, and, well, guess what happens? Rebecca also says something about always having David's back, and when she said that, my immediate thought was, well, she's dead, and wouldn't you know it? girl, no. There were also some elements and progressive story points that felt a bit spontaneous here or there, but the fact of the matter is that doesn't take you out of it. At the end of the day, the strongest part of this series was its themes and story, and they executed that damn well. So while this absolutely crushed my entire being, I would 100% recommend this to anyone watching, just so you can see David's goofy, happy smile. And with that, thanks for watching. I'd like to thank Fahim again for commissioning this series through Patreon. It always means a lot to me, and I always appreciate it so much more than I can say that you trust me enough to make videos like this. For anyone wondering, you can commission a review video through Patreon of any short series or movie you enjoy. But please be aware, it's quite an expensive tier since it takes me a lot to put these videos together. I also really appreciate the support in general through Patreon, but as always, I know not everyone can support me in that way, and just watching and sharing these videos does more than you can imagine for me. If there's anything you'd like to see me cover, One Piece or otherwise, please let me know, and I'll see you in whatever I make next. See ya!